Hello all. Thank you and welcome for joining welcome and thank you for joining us for FCI Live 2026. This is our session on stage 5, post-open startup organizing, and I'll be leading this one with you today. Before we get started with that, we want to thank our FCI Live champion sponsors. Frontier Co-op and National Co-op Grocers have been champion sponsors since the beginning of FCI Live, making it possible year after year, and Cabot Creamery Co-op has joined them as a champion sponsor this year, and we're so excited about that. Thank you to all three of them for making it possible for us to make the entire series free to everyone and still actually be able to support and pay all of our speakers and our staff that make it possible. All right, so this is going to be our session on stage 5, post-open startup organizing. We've got a lot to cover, and I actually did this session with Michelle Schreier, which I'll mention in a moment, at Up and Coming last year, the National In-Person Startup Food Co-op Conference, and it's a longer session. I have done my best to pare it down in a way that makes sense, and there's some updates and some cleanup of how some things are organized. If this is your second time seeing it, there's still some changes and really valuable things. But what you can expect to get out of this session, we're going to talk about why a whole new stage. Stage 5 did not exist before 18 months ago. The work existed, but no one had named it and knew what it meant and what was going on. And that was why it was added, where the stage 5 organizing begins, and the thing that's harder to define, where it ends. And is the core work. We're not going to be able to get into the graphic detail of every little bit of the work, but the overarching main work that happens in stage 5. Now, one of those things I do want to mention, again, I did this session the first time with Michelle Schrei, and from National Co-op Grocers. And I really want to mention that not just because she helped build some of the slides, but because Michelle is actually the pioneer of the concept of the 5th stage. Michelle was actually on Food Co-op Initiative's board at the very, very beginning of our work. She's always been passionate about startup food co-ops, and now in her work as the director of strategic engagement at NCG, she works directly with her team who supports startups as they open all of the time. There have been quite a few opens, especially in the central part of the country where she is and where a lot of her team is. So she has seen so much of it firsthand for many years. And so when we were talking about the framework, and what needed to change, Michelle Schrei was really the one who coined the concept and helped us all understand why it was so important. So I just want to take a big shout out to Michelle, who is not with me today, as someone who helped coin this, a name for it, a name that it needed to be an entire stage, that we were missing something. So that's a little bit of the history already, but I'm gonna give you just a minute more of history. And for those who cannot see this, a photo here of Detroit, of two very happy owners of Detroit People's Food Co-op in Detroit, Michigan, with their bags of groceries. So we're getting started with why we need stage 5. So for those of you who've been organizing a little longer or supporting the startup food co-op community, you will remember the graphic you will see on the left called the Food Co-op Development Model, 4 cornerstones in 3 stages. And this was developed a long time ago. So FCI started around 2020 or 2005, and this was actually solidified by 2007. And it was basically created from what best practices we were seeing in those early days of new startup food co-ops. Organizing a food co-op since 2000 is very, very different. It's a very different grocery industry. There's different costs, there's different expectations than it was in the 1970s in the last wave, the second wave of food co-ops had organized. Most food co-ops that are open today, the majority still are second wave food co-ops. Most of them hadn't been there when their co-op first opened, and when they did, the 1970s was a very different world. And so we had a bunch of people in food co-ops seeing this trend for new startups forming and starting to quickly study and organize everything we were learning about what was working and what was not working as these startup food co-ops got open. And that was called the Food Co-op Development Model. And that was the model from around 2017 until 2023 or 4, is it 4? 4? The fall of 2024. And then from that, FCI did a whole process it was a year and a half long with experts, with startups in the field, reevaluating the model, which actually had been being named even by its founders and the people who created it for about 8 years that it needed overhauling, that had a lot of great information in it, but we had learned so much since, and things were changing that it needed updating. And that finally happened in 2024. And so what you see on the right is the Food Co-op Development Framework. And I'm not going to go too much further into its history today, but it's important because stage five didn't exist in the four cornerstones and three stages. So if you've been a startup food co-op for more than 3 or 4 years, if you've been supporting startup food co-ops for that longer than that, you've been working with the four cornerstones and three stages. And there are many things from that that just morphed slightly in the framework when the framework was created. But there are some things that are brand new, and stage five is one of them. So when it was still the four cornerstones and three stages, first off, what we now call stages one, two, three, and four all fit into what they called stage one, two, and three, keeping in mind that there was stage one, there was stage 2A and 2B, there was stage three, 3A, B, C, D. And so as we learned more, it just kind of got squished into those stages. We spread some of that out. And so one through three became one through four with some little changes and tweaks. But when it was this four and three model, stage four, now we say that stage four ends the day you open your store. And that was it. The four and three model said you're end of stage three, you opened your store, huzzah! Now, the phrase always afterwards, after that was, and now the real work begins, ha ha ha. And it was meant seriously, but it was kind of like you're done being a startup. That's it. You open your store, it's over. There are some real problems with this. And I think it's really important that we name because we all learn, grow, evolve. It's an important part of cooperation that this was just a mistake. There was a real error in this. And why? What was the mistake? Well, the first question I have for you is the goal in your mind to get to opening day and open your club? Is that it? Is that why you've been organizing for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, in some cases, years to open your food co-op? Was to have that day to take the snapshots, take the picture, and go, huzzah! We opened the store. Clearly, you're looking forward to it. Or if you've experienced it, it was an amazing lifetime, defining experience, right? This is not in question whatsoever. But it wasn't the end goal. That was a moment of celebration to what you were actually trying to accomplish, or at least we think so. We think that most of us, the goal is actually a financially healthy, cooperatively owned store that can meet the co-op's vision that will be there serving our communities for years and years to come. If the end goal is, well, you're a startup and you opened, great, dude, we're done. But that's not actually the goal of the startup process. The other major issue is we've been trying to undo this now at FCI now. I think I looked at my slides the first time I presented publicly at Up and Coming, trying to undo some of this. And we've been presenting in startup peer groups before that. Trying to undo this concept was 7 years ago. But it's taken some time to get through people's heads that this idea of that we used to, and absolutely the startup food co-op movement leaders, and including FCI, used to say, and then you hire your GM. Ta-da! The GM will take it from here. The board can sit back and accept reports and shake hands, right, with owners, and they are done. But this isn't the reality we found. The reality we found is that the GM often needs a working board while they work to stabilize the store. They're getting to stability is not guaranteed and doesn't happen overnight. The board has to take a very different role. No matter how talented the GM is, no matter how strong they are, no matter even if they've had this exact experience of being a GM of a food co-op before, they still can't just have a board go, here you go, and sit down. Now, this advice came from some well-intentioned places. So again, this boils down to the needs and risks of a startup food co-op after opening are still very different in critical ways from those of an established food co-op. So you may be open and running a business that looks very similar to the established food co-op down the road, but that co-op that's been around for decades and running for decades has very different needs and is experiencing very different risks than a startup. And startups are experiencing more needs and more risks, and they are unique to startups. So it was a real problem to say, ta-da, your store's open, your established co-op now, just do what established food co-ops do. You're good. And there's lots of brilliant people who can help you do what an established food co-op does. So go call them. And then the other major problem being the role of boards and GMs are just, we have found different. They are truly different in post-open startups than it is in an established food co-op. And both of these problems, now they happen for a reason. And I will say there's two main factors. Why did we give this advice? And how did we miss that it was causing a lot of problems? And started to, I would say, about 9 years ago, started to cause harm in startup food co-ops. Because before that, in the early phase of the third wave of startup food co-ops, this wave started around 2000, more solidly 2005, let's say 2000 and to today. And during that early portion, there was something we actually call it the food co-op golden years. Food co-ops were absolutely rocking it. We didn't have a lot of major competition. What competition we had wasn't a problem for us. Margins were higher. It was simply, I mean, it was not easy work. It will never be easy work to be an independent grocery store, but you could make mistakes and survive. You can make a lot more mistakes and survive. And startups that opened between 2000 and maybe about 2012 experienced this. They could make a lot more mistakes and adjust and adapt, and there was room for that. The other one that people always point to is that there's been a GM crisis going on, meaning available GMs with skills and experience for quite a while. And while that's true, that was true then too, yes, there were experienced GMs taking on startup food co-ops and opening them. Some of them though were experienced as ops managers or deli managers or so forth, and that still worked. They had time to grow as a GM and really fully understand the role. And certainly they're gifted, talented leaders. But we've seen that in the second half of the third wave, people who were finance managers, who were deli managers, who were ops managers, who are very good at what they did, came with high recommendations, but learning the GM role, no matter how much you've been adjacent to it, in the middle of opening a startup food co-op in a time in an industry where you can't make a mistake anymore. There's really no room for it. That has really, really changed what was possible. So the second half of this wave of startup food co-ops, this third wave, has had a very different experience. So that advice came from a good place. It had borne out, but it started to be very different about 8, 9 years ago. Okay, so that means we're going to focus today on this stage five. We've talked about where it came from. There were two key mistakes really in the advice that was being given before stage five was built. And so this was created to address a lot of what we were seeing. Now, stage five always existed. It existed even back when you could make more mistakes and we had more experienced GMs that were available to possibly open startup food co-ops. This stage still existed. It exists even if everything goes almost exactly to plan. It's though also a stage that can be particularly risky, and not every co-op will go through it in the most seamless possible way, especially as what we've been seeing as of late. So it's probably clear as I'm saying all this that we don't know everything about stage five yet. And more so, we don't have all the tools to support startups through this. The startup food co-op movement is a constantly evolving movement. Food cooperation is constantly evolving. The grocery industry is not just constantly evolving, but rapidly speeding up how it's evolving, how people purchase food, where they purchase food, what, the costs, the overhead, the ways, the technology, it's all changing incredibly fast. And so there's so much that we talk about today in the startup food co-op movement. You'll hear from FCI and other experts that we actually learned from you. The startup food co-op movement is made up of the people who are on the ground doing the work as much as us long-term experts working together, sharing information. And so there's always a part of it that is evolving, that is new, that we don't know everything about yet. And this is very much one of those parts. So what I'm going to share with you today is what we know so far. It is not everything, but I wanted to start of what we know so far about the actual work. What is happening in stage five? We had our grand opening. Huzzah! Please drink that in. Most amazing experience will nourish you for the days to come. And now that your store is open in your stage five, there's a lot more work to be done. And it falls into some major categories. We're calling it right now. Again, this is all work in progress, loosely, the big four. The big four things that have to happen in stage five is we've got to actually build up the leadership to lead this now open food co-op. We're going to go into more depth on all these in the next slides. We need to find the actual realistic financial pathway, not the planned one, unless we are just one of those rare but very likely, it does happen in very lucky startups that hit exactly pretty much the financial performance that was expected before we opened. But even that needs to be watched and tested. We need to make sure we have a financial pathway that is reality now that we're open. We need to be finding our customers. Opening a brand new store doesn't mean everyone's just going to show up. We're going to talk about that in more depth as well. And then making the core values real. You could talk about this different ways. Some people say the vision. We use the vision term a little differently in the food co-op development framework. What we mean by core values are the ways you said you would deliver what the co-op is about. So this is we are going to build up the local food system. We are going to have we're going to create economic impact through great jobs. We're going to, these are the specific ways that we said these things will definitely be delivered in our store. And these are the values that we will center that store around. Making those real in how making them show up visibly in the store and in our operations within that store and visible to the community around us is a lot of work. And it's not, we see a lot of startups struggle with this when they get open. So making those core values actually manifest now that we open, now that we have a store where we have to physically manifest those values beyond just what's on our social media. So these are the four big areas. We're going to go a little more to depth on each one. What do I mean about stage five work, building leadership? I'm saying building leadership. What I mean is, here's reality. Your board has never been the board of an open food co-op. There's no insult implied about how good organizers your board is. If you got open, your board is a powerhouse. But you are basically starting over at square one in a lot of ways. You have never been the board of an open food co-op who has been in charge of a GM who is running an active store where there is real risk going on. And so you're kind of starting over from ground zero. This GM has never been the GM of this brand new food co-op. If you happen to get a GM who is experienced is a food co-op GM, he or she or they are experienced in running food co-ops. They still very likely have never opened a startup food co-op, which is such a different thing. And even in the rare cases that we have seen GMs who have opened a startup before open another startup food co-op, it has been every single time, it is a slightly different experience and there are different learning curves because we don't know what's coming. We have a plan and we hope that what we planned is what's going to happen, but it's not going to happen exactly like we planned. And sometimes it's not going to happen at all like we planned. And so the GM has never been the GM of this co-op. And then quite often you have someone who has never been the GM of a food co-op before, much less a startup. So maybe they have been, again, a department manager, an operations manager. Maybe they've been a store manager for a major chain. All of these bring a lot of talents and skills that are really useful, but the GM role is different. It is very different. And growing into it, remember, we don't have room for mistakes. That was working much better in the first half of the second wave. But now the GM doesn't really have time to learn through making errors, which is how humans learn. They need to they need to be built up fast to be able to do their job and do it well. And then lastly, what I call, and this is I'm going to put my name on this, I call the strategic leadership team. That is when the board and the GM have a powerful, healthy, well-boundaried, understood relationship where they're working together as a team to strategically lead this co-op to success, where they know how to team with one another. That relationship building takes time. And your GM comes in not too long before the store opens and is under immense learning curve stress. You're under immense learning curve stress. That is a tough time to build a really powerful teaming relationship, but it's got to happen. This is one of the biggest pieces of work in the stage five. So you're learning their job, they're learning their job, and you're learning the way you have to combine and become more than the whole of your parts, right? The GM and the board together are something even greater than a part. So there's this third piece, that relationship, and you have to build all three in the midst of a lot of immense amount of work, immense amount of hours, and a lot of uncertainty. This is one of the big four for what you're doing in stage five. Second, you're finding your financial pathway. I am so glad you did a pro forma. You had to do a pro forma. I hope you had it vetted by lots of people. I hope you stress tested it. I hope you were honest with yourself. I hope that we didn't give in and we've all done it to one of those urges to go, it would work if the margin was just a point higher. We'll just fudge it. But we used really honest numbers and we still found a path through on that pro forma. That was all it was, though. It was a pre-concept of the financial performance of something that does not yet exist. And sometimes your call will perform exactly that way, not too often. So, but what we start with is we open the doors and we are laser focused on the actual financial results that we're getting week by week and how they match that financial plan. If we're seeing quickly that we're in range, we wait things out, we think it through, we talk as board and GM, make sure we understand what we think the factors are, what we need to keep an eye on. If we're quickly getting out of alignment with that financial plan, which I have yet to see a startup food co-op perform really close to the plan more than 3, 4 weeks and then suddenly get it really out of alignment with it. That's unlikely, but the even more unlikely is when you are performing way off from the plan within a couple weeks and it'll get better. No, it generally won't. So we are watching very closely. All right, what is the actual financial performance, the board and the GM together, week by week? We're looking at key factors, which I've got a whole other presentation on, but is going to be sales, is going to be labor percent of sales, and it's going to be cash. Those are going to be our top three. There are other many important financial indicators once those three are doing things that are not terrifying. But we're going to be focused there in the early days and making sure that we're not burning cash faster than we expected, that the labor as a percent of sales is being controlled, and that sales are where we need them to be. A lot of startups right now are finding that their financial performance after open is not exactly like planned. We have seen a couple recently that have performed very close to their expected plan. And that's, I'd say, maybe a third right now, to be completely honest, since 2020, a third of startups are performing very close to the existing plan. But we are watching that. And any GM will tell you, Assabet Food Co-op, Fredericksburg Food Co-op, Detroit Food Co-op, they have performed close to plan. They're watching that like a hawk, and together the GM and the board to make sure that that was what was happening, because we can burn through cash very fast and end up in a very, very dangerous alleyway. Or if you're one of what is right now about 2/3 of startups that are going to perform somewhat or a lot off from their projected financial performance, we've got to adjust. We've got to adjust to meet the plan to reality. We've got to, and that is not just, okay, so we actually have this in sales and we'll just trim staff back a little. When we don't have the sales, then we don't have, even if we cut back the staff, we can't afford all the overhead. The overhead was planned to that amount of sales too. Or maybe we've also seen the sales are there, but the staff, the cost of staff is actually like, it's supposed to maybe be 23% of every dollar that comes in the store. 23% of sales is going to staffing costs, and it's 50. So the sales look great, but we are burning the cash. We are going to be out of cash. We cannot afford that kind of staff. Money is just going down the drain. So this fifth stage, as a strategic leadership team, a big piece of your work is, are we hitting the financial plan? Let's analyze that. Let's watch that. Let's be talking about it. If we're not, let's be thinking about, is it time to act? Is there a problem yet? What could the causes be? And when do we ask for help? When do we have to redraw completely? And so this is a major piece of the work in a food co-op, that startup food co-op that opens and performs very close to financial plan. You will not see that board or GM feel comfortable that they're certain that's what's going on, usually for 18 months. They'll have a good feeling, but they're still very, very nervous. Oh, but did you see that month? That month was 5% under. I'm like, okay, but like overall, you guys are hitting most goals. Like, and they'll still be like, watching so close for things to go off. We don't consider it like, yep, okay, you are meeting financial plan until you've been watching for 18 months, that the sales are there, that we're not burning cash at an unexpected rate, that it is a sustainable financial project. So that's part two of the big four. What else will you be working on? You will be working on finding your customers. Changing people's shopping habits is hard. And I actually learned this, I'm going to keep saying from Jade Barker from Colluminate. She's the first person who ever said it to me. I don't know if she thought of it herself or she found it somewhere else, but I always attribute it to Jade, which is people were already finding their groceries somewhere. No matter how much your community needs this store or doesn't have a store at all grocery store within miles, what they were finding their groceries already, and changing people's shopping habits is hard. It was considered one of the major factors of the failure of the Renaissance co-op grocery store, and they hadn't had a grocery store in that neighborhood in 17 years, and they put their food court right where the old grocery store had been, and they fought very hard for that. People wanted that. But what they found was that people had already completely changed their shopping habits and weren't used to shopping in their neighborhood for groceries. And it was really hard to change people's shopping habits. So in their case, nobody really had thought of that yet, that that was going to be a major issue. So they weren't prepared. So if they had known that ahead of time and been able to prepare for that factor, but we didn't at the time. But the reality is that changing people's shopping habits is hard, and it's not a science, it's an art. There's a lot of things we can tell you about those of us who have grown sales, who have found audiences for stores. And some people really have the knack and have done it at multiple stores. But we still have to tell you, we kind of got to be there feeling out what's going on. Here's some like general advice, but also like it's a day-to-day feeling out what's working, what's pulling our audience, what's not pulling our audience, who's showing up, who's not showing up. And there's things like cat studies that you can do that are science that will help a little bit and let you know where your customers are coming from so you can figure out, oh, we thought this was going to be our trade area, but like only this and this is our trade area. What's going on here? Do we double down on these folks because they've ended up bigger shoppers than we expected? Or do we go after these folks that were clearly core audience for us but aren't shopping here? They haven't found out about us or changed habits. So there's some science available, but a lot of it you got to figure it out for your community. And every community is slightly different, despite core concepts that I can share with you at some time about sales growth and finding your customer base. So, and member owners aren't enough. I can't stress this enough. I'm going to keep saying this. What we're finding is, I don't have a ton of data, but every time I talk to a startup in the last 8 years, about somewhere in the range, it could be a little above, maybe up to 50%, and it can be a little below, but about 40% of all shopping dollars coming into the store once the store is open are dollars that were spent by a member owner. About 40%. People are like, and the first thought is always, we need to get all the members to shop. No, not really. Spend a little bit of energy making sure they know the store is open, but usually a majority of your member owners believed in the concept, loved it, will shop occasionally, but if you may just not have located in a shopping spot that fits their pattern. They may have loved the idea of the co-op, but actually prefer to buy their groceries online. There can be a lot of reasons, but a lot of what we're doing after we open is finding a new customer base. Member owners are still core, but they're not all of it, and they never will be. So we need to find who is our customer for the grocery store that we are offering the community. And then there's I call it, and this is a me phrase, define your magic in the market. You have to know, you have to find once you're open, what is that magic sweet spot that you fill that no other co-op, no other grocery store fills in that market that is worth it to people to show up for. There's the second part. So if you're whether in an area with high competition or low competition, you can still have the problem that nobody knows exactly why to shop with you. What is your value? It's also called your value proposition in that grocery market. And that sometimes ends up being a little different than you expected once you open, or you're just not delivering that value proposition in a way that's actually connecting with the shopper base. Like we said, we were going to be local, 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 and that was what's going to be unique about so many local products. And we do have local products, but the stories aren't being told throughout the store. They're not well marked on the shelf. We haven't created this presence. And there's lots of different pieces to that that screams, we do local and we do it better than anyone else. Or we are your community grocery store. We're creating jobs in the neighborhood. We're all about redevelopment of our community, which is something everyone here cares about. But somehow it's not really coming across. People don't even realize it's community owned, and they're not finding enough reasons to shop in the store. We got to define our magic in the market as a grocery store. What is it that you have to offer that will get people to change their behavior? And then getting the word out in a way that works. Startup food co-ops, we have no reputation when we open. Those who do market studies for food co-ops will tell you when they do market studies for like independent regional, like small natural food chains, or for a food co-op, they discount the sales for a food co-op significantly more because we are so bad at marketing and being visible. And we don't have chain recognition much either. So unless it's your fourth, fifth, sixth store in a large market like Outpost Natural Foods in Milwaukee or something like that, you don't have a lot of brand recognition. And that is so important for people showing up. So you've got all this work to do to build brand recognition. So finding your customers is area number 3 of all the work you're going to need to be doing. And then area 4, making the values real. There are some people who will debate with me that this is as important as the last 3. And I will say now, I'm throwing down, they're wrong. And a lot of people will agree with me, but there's some who will disagree. I will say they're wrong. I have been working at too many startups. I've worked in too many turnarounds to say making the values real. How is your physical food co-op grocery store actually now delivering the promised values that you said were going to be so important? It's just one example, but we're going to go back to that example of local. You said you were going to be local, local, local. How are you delivering that? Do people walk in and feel like, yeah, this is what they promised. This is what we expected. How are those values now that you've opened the store? Are those values showing up in the community beyond the store? Definitely want to really make sure it's showing up in the store first. But if it isn't, you're not doing any of the work you used to be doing outside of the co-op to show up in the community or bringing that community work into the store to deliver your values in really meaningful ways that connects the outside community's needs to what's happening inside the store. You're not making the values real. And even if you are, how are you communicating that? If people come in and go say, I don't know, I just don't really notice the local here. You can get as frustrated as you want and say, there are these signs we put up and there's little shelf toppers that say local, and it doesn't matter. It means we haven't communicated it in a way that is connecting those values to people. Now, if they say, I don't really care about the local, it's cool and all, but then that's a different problem. But if they're coming and say, I just don't feel it, like that's not, you said this store was really going to feel like one of the things that they said, Gem City Market, which is in Dayton, Ohio, that it was so important that the store felt like Dayton. And one thing when people first walked in, they said is, I don't know, it doesn't fully feel like Dayton. And there's a lot more to it than that, but Dayton is known as the home of the funk. They started playing Dayton sourced, Dayton created funk music. They put up albums that were produced in their community on the wall, different things, but they had to bring the sense that you said this was going to be about Dayton, for Dayton, a community center of food and culture for Dayton. And then we didn't see that. You said, but we did this and we painted it this way and we have these products. If they say they don't experience it, they don't experience it. And this is normal for startups to need to do some work to adjust, to make those values very physical and real in the store and in our storytelling and our marketing while we're trying to figure out how to run this business. It's got to be done. And what this is really about, actually, if you've been following some of our other sessions about the framework development tool, is one of our core resources that Dr. Angela Sales both coined and presented on earlier in the series. You can find the video in the playlist for this FCI live series on trust. And trust is a key resource before and after open to the success of your co-op. And in stage 5, you kind of have to, you're like, okay, you got our trust to invest in the store, to open the store, but now you kind of have this second hill to climb with trust, which is we put a lot of trust in this co-op. Is it going to deliver? And not just a great shopping experience. Is it going to deliver the values in that shopping experience that I invested in? So those four key big areas of work, so go again real quick, is building the leadership, finding your financial pathway. Sometimes you have to redraw it and even raise more money and after open, and then finding your customers and making those core values real. Those are going to be four key areas of work throughout stage five. I'm going to pause here for a second. We're going to talk about when stage five ends and how you know that in just a second. If anyone has any questions they want to put in the chat before I jump into the next section, I'm going to just pause for a second here and allow a little minute for that. If there are any questions or comments about what I've shared so far. All right, we're going to keep going. So we got it. Stage five, four big areas of work that we really know are key so far about stage five. Again, this is an evolving understanding of this whole stage is, I'd say that I think we are solidly know two-thirds of it and I'd say maybe even three-quarters of it. But what we know versus what we have tools for, it is an evolving area. So, okay, we think we know some of the big four areas. They might shift a little, but these are definitely the places that you're going to be working and working hard as a GM and board in stage five as a startup food co-op. And these are needs that are very different. Now, those are things that I would actually assess an established co-op that's not doing well as well, that need to be assessed, but they're uniquely needs only of startup food co-ops and co-ops that are in crisis, even if they're established. So those are those four unique areas of work that we focus on in those conditions. So great. But when does stage five end then? We know it starts when the store opens. Great. We are in stage five. The store has opened. Ta-da! Now when do we get out? So I'm going to talk about this real quickly through the lens again of the framework. Let's think of it this way. It is completed on an operational level. Operations is a word we use to define the work of the general manager, the operation of the business. That's a whole session to itself, but let's just say the operational area of work, the running of the store. We've completed stage five work when the store has reliable systems in place to safely and legally operate the business, and I would also now say efficiently. A lot of times, the financial problems are coming from really poor, ineffective systems that make it so the staff can't thrive and can't get things done in an efficient manner. The store's money is in order. It is hitting financial targets that allow it to meet its financial obligations now, and there is a detailed financial plan for going 5 years out minimum that show positive cash flow, that show that we can keep cash the same or increasing and pay our debts for the next 5 years. And sometimes that means restructuring the debt. That's a whole, again, recalibrating your financial plan when you don't hit goals is a whole another thing. But we know that when the money resource operationally, we have that 5 year plan and we're hitting the targets for that 5 year plan. There is a path where if we continue to perform to a realistic level, we can get through the next 5 years and not have our cash decrease and be able to pay our debts and keep this co-op open. The resource of people, operationally, the right people are in place. The GM has shown they're able to lead the co-op successfully and effective and have effective support people that have been named and engaged who are helping them fill in any spots, any weaknesses, any areas they need more information. And I want to say this to any GMs who see this now or in the future. No GM is coming into a startup food co-op and opening it. It has every single skill set that is necessary to succeed as a startup GM. Because as we know, if you've ever been a general manager before, it is a nigh impossible job with unbelievably high expectations, and it is harder when you are opening a brand new store that has never existed before. So we need not just the right GM in place, but the GM has the right supports in place to help them with the things that they need to strengthen in and or to help them with things that they may never be strong in, but they've got a good solution because they've got support in those areas. The GM clearly knows, we're going to the knowledge resource. The GM clearly has the knowledge needed to sustainably lead the store and meet the co-op's longer term obligations. What we sometimes find is the GM knows how to run the store, and they're doing a great job there in a very tough situation, but they do not understand the co-op's long-term financial performance and obligations and debt. They can say, well, here's our sales today and here's our labor for the week and we met the labor goal. But what's going to happen in 2 years if we keep performing this way? Will our cash have slowly eroded? Will we not be able to pay our loans? We need them to, the GM has to actually have the knowledge to sustainably keep leading the store and understand the co-op's obligations now and in the long term. And then operationally, trust. Through delivering on the vision and those core values in the operational store, trust has been built both with owners and our core customer base. They believe in what we're doing. They believe we're going to deliver. They forgive our mistakes because we're going to make them because they see that we are committed and are mostly winning at doing the work and delivering what we said we would deliver. As a governance, so as a board, what will the resources look like when you're ready to graduate stage 5? The board will have chosen a system of governance and have created operational policies and reporting expectations that give you an effective window into the operations of the store, and I would add now without overburdening the GM, which is a fine art itself. The board understands the co-op's money. There is no way that you can just trust the GM to understand the money by themselves. That is not good for them, and it's definitely not good for your co-op. The board understands the money. The board is getting the appropriate financial reporting and long-term budgets that show sustainability and is clear about whether the co-op is meeting the necessary goals, knows which goals to watch. The right people are on the board. The board has a majority of seats filled, and these people are giving a meaningful level of involvement and focus on the co-op. It's not like one or two people who are just holding the whole thing together. The board has the knowledge needed to understand their role, build healthy relationships with their GM, and fulfill their responsibility to owners, including be able to identify when the GM is not competent to do their role, despite whatever intentions. And then the board and GM have built trust in one another as the strategic leadership team of the co-op. So this is a governance responsibility. Not that the GM has no role in it, but you're the boss, and it's your job to build that effective relationship, tell them what the expectations are, hold appropriate boundaries while also giving them appropriate support, and build that trust that you can grow and learn, make mistakes, recover, and work together. So this is just an overview of what it would look like in each of the areas of the resources as in governance and in operations if you were ready to graduate stage 5. Leaving stage 5 and becoming an established food co-op does not mean the store operations are perfect. There is no financial uncertainty ahead. Welcome to being a food co-op. We work in an industry with really tiny margins that is set up to benefit only the mega corporations in food, and it is always hard. It is always difficult. No one said it wasn't going to be. Co-ops pop up where there isn't margin for people to make a whole bunch of money to do things in a way that actually benefits the community. So it's always going to be uncertain. But I don't mean we mean yeah, there could be, COVID could happen and we have to close our store for a month. There could be a sudden economic downturn. There could be things will happen. There isn't, but I mean the kind of uncertainty where you literally don't know how you're going to be open in 18 months. Your current performance shows no path to how that's going to work. We're talking about you have a 5-year path to how you would be sustainable. The co-op is out of debt? No, the co-op is not going to be out of debt. That's not necessary to leave stage 5. A lot of startup food co-ops are still paying off debt from opening 7 years after open, sometimes 10 years after open. And that's absolutely fine. As long as the financial plan is realistic, you can meet it and it shows that you'll be able to pay your debt as agreed, including if you had to restructure it. As long as you can pay it, you can get them to restructure it and you can pay it on that restructured plan. That's great. The co-op does not need to be out of debt to leave stage 5. The store is delivering every bit of the vision as fully hoped? Nope. Maybe you'll have gotten a lot of things in place, but you really always wanted to have that food for all program in place and it's year 2 and everything else is going well, but you still just haven't been able to financially and or just find the operational time to launch that. But you're doing all these other really meaningful pieces. That's normal. You're not going to be able to deliver all the pieces of the vision or your core values as fast as you hoped. That's not to be expected. But none of those things mean you can't leave stage 5. What it does mean to leave stage 5 is the co-op's not in crisis mode. The board and GM mutually feel they have a clear financial sustainable plan and that they can meet it. They know where they're going to be in 5 years, and they believe they can meet those numbers because they're realistic. And they show a way that we're going to pay all the debts, keep the cash flow positive, and not go out of business. The store has a clear role in the community and an invested customer base. This will address both your values and finding your audience, finding your community, finding your customers. You have created a clear role for the co-op as a grocery store in the grocery store landscape of your community. And you've also created a very clear role for it in the community as something that serves the community. Like we have startup food co-ops who said, in November, when there was the big SNAP crisis, they've been open 2 years, and people called the food co-op. Organizations that meet food needs in the community and individual owners called the co-op and said, "What are we going to do? How can you help?" That's a clear role in the community. The co-op is a trusted resource, both as a business and as a resource to the community around food issues. If you take nothing else away from today, I want you to take away a couple core things that we definitely know right now that you need to know, that you have the right to know as you continue to organize your food co-op. The demand on the board will not decrease when the doors open to your store. It will just change. The types of demands will change. And we want you to mentally prepare for that and start to do the work to think through how the board's going to become sustainable. And part of that is people will change roles. The board's work is very different after open in a lot of ways, and some people will be better suited for that, and some people will be better suited for the pre-open, some will be suited for both. But one thing that we definitely were not getting across, and it wasn't fair to organizers, is that the demand on the board will not decrease after you open the store. That's pretty rare. If everything goes as expected and very close to plan, maybe in 12 to 18 months, you'll start to see the demand on the board significantly decrease. But that's in a best case scenario. The board cannot afford to be food co-op financials illiterate. You just can't. You absolutely cannot go, "Okay, GM, you got it from here. Just give us a financial report and you feel like it." And I've had people say, "Well, then I'm out. I'm no use to the board." I have seen people who tell me they're absolutely terrible at numbers, who were nurses, who were graphic designers, who were daycare managers, who told me, they could not, they're terrible with numbers, who absolutely now could talk circles around a lot of people about the basics of the basic financial indicators you need to watch in a food co-op and what they mean. It's not easy, but it's not that hard either. You just have to know what they are and get good training. So, and you can't afford to be food co-op business financial illiterate. You can read that pro forma, that's great. What do you know about operating business financials of a food co-op? And which parts do you need to know? And which parts do you not need to know? And there are trainings out there for this. This is one where there is a tool. There are trainings out for that. Especially if you want one place to start with and look is Colluminate has a financial training for boards that I think is like a couple sessions long. I've heard terrific things about it, talking about these key financial indicators. Other thing you need to know is there's a more than 50% chance right now the co-op will need to raise more funds, more money after opening. And I say this based on the reality since 2020, that 50% at least of startups that have opened since 2020 have had to raise more funds. Some of them have been able to do it just through ownership and equity drives, and that's been enough to keep them moving. But a lot of them have had to take on new loans, have had to find new grants, have even have done new owner loan campaigns. There has been a need to replenish cash within the first 2.5 years, usually is when it really hits. And you can see it coming. And you don't raise it unless you have a clear financial plan that if you get that money, that you can actually continue to operate. You're not just going to throw it down that hole and say, "Well, we have no idea to operate this co-op sustainably, but if we can raise $200,000, we'll stay open another year." And that's literally, you can burn through it that fast, easy. Easy. You can do it in a lot less than a year. You have to say, if we get this, whatever, $200,000, $500,000, $50,000, whatever it is, that we've plugged that into a financial plan and we know where that fits, and then we're going to be able to be sustainable. So if you take nothing else away from what happens in stage 5, I hope you'll take away those things. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and actually talk and answer questions because I think it'd be good to have room for that. There are, after the closing slides, several bonus sides that are full of a whole bunch of thoughts that Michelle and I threw down that are not, they're somewhat organized. I don't think that well organized when we were putting this together a year ago to first talk about stage five. And I think they're really useful. And I will email them out to everyone by the end of the week who registered for the session. But I think rather than going through some of that less organized bonus content with kind of random details about some of these pieces that we've already talked about, I'll share those with you via email. They're all written out pretty sentence-like. There's a lot of text, and so you can read those at your leisure and get quite a bit from it. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see if people have comments or questions. Yeah, we don't, I am total, it's not a big room, Kim. I'm fine with you unmuting. So if you,
Okay.
go ahead.
Thanks, JQ. Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of finding your customer, other than, like looking at what is selling in the store, how do you have any other thoughts on, how you do that and how you determine, and especially like with our community being so diverse, we started out as a hybrid store, with a mix of natural, organic, and conventional. But we're kind of finding that conventional isn't selling all that well. I think people are getting those products other places already. So, but anyway, I just wanted to see if you had any other thoughts on how you define, how you find your customers.
Absolutely. So first up, just so everyone on the call knows, Kim Frink is with Suncoast Market that just opened a couple months ago in Imperial Beach, California. So I would say two things. One, it's very hard to get people to understand to agree with me on this, but there is a little bit of science around finding those customers, and it absolutely will help you make better decisions as you find those customers. And that is a cat study. And a cat study, I forget what the CAT stands for. I'm not even trying, but what it does is they will have you interview very briefly. You'll have volunteers asking people where they came from. They can just show you, they'll have a big map. They can show you the intersection and how much they spent and where they're going to. And you collect all that data and you put it in a spreadsheet. And then your market study analysis analyzes and really places all those people and interactions onto that census tract map that they created about where they predicted your customers would come from. And from that, not only can they tell you where you underperforming, where you overperforming, so maybe we want to target those people in marketing, but it also can tell you a lot about maybe why your product mix might be off. Because that census tract shops almost exclusively conventional. This census tract is provides a lot more natural foods. So I really suggest it's about $2,000 if you already got a market study. I strongly suggest people find and do the cat study. Thank you, Heather. Heather has put a link in there. And this is coming from someone who gets no kickback, no money from this, who has seen the power of it again and again and again in helping to turn around food co-ops with sales. Just know what you're up against versus what you thought was going to happen as a starting point. So that's the science. When we get to the art, first off, it's really normal to bring in the product mix and go, oh, that wasn't quite right. Fredericksburg Food Co-op actually found they needed to bring in more conventional. They needed to bring in more, they're like, they needed to bring in more low price conventional. And they didn't see that coming. It wasn't exactly, it was what people were telling them before they opened. But remember, usually about 60% of those customers who are coming into the store weren't telling you what they wanted before you opened. They weren't your owners. So we're just learning what they need. Detroit People's Food Co-op saw this as well. They pivoted to go about 50% conventional right before they opened. It was felt like that was really needed. They found almost immediately the produce department conventional never sold. People didn't want that. The produce department needed to go 100% organic, but the rest of the store is still pretty 50-50. And it's it's not possible to predict beforehand exactly what people are going to respond to. So the hope is that you guys are working with National Co-op Grocers. They can help with that. The GM's definitely got to be feeling it out. But also, we don't want to do too much knee-jerk reacting. I've seen when GMs have made major changes to the product mix, they have usually I've never seen them wait it out less than like 4 months minimum, usually 6, before they start making massive changes. Like they go, okay, Like even in Detroit, where they said it's pretty clear right away nobody wanted conventional when it came to the produce department. And I'm not sure if that held true, but that was what the GM was saying at the time. He didn't do that overnight. He started bringing in a few more things, watching what's happening, and as the signs on the wall became very clear, then we see some more meaningful shifts happening. So hopefully your sales are such that you don't need to figure it out really, really fast because it's better to figure it out over a number of months and really not make sudden moves just because you haven't seen the response you were looking for yet. So I would start there. I got a lot of other thoughts on that. There are other people on the call who do, but I think that's a good place to start. It's so beyond that particular to every community, finding the customers, because some of it is not your product mix. And some of it isn't that you haven't advertised to the right people. Some of it sometimes is that you haven't defined a clear position in the market as why people would shop there. And it's a very, for me at least, and there's people on the call who are actually have the skill set as well. I feel like it is an art. It's very delicate feeling what's working, what's not working, what people are reacting to on a marketing level, on a product level when they walk in the store. And can take some time. But the cat study and the watching your product mix and making slow adjustments and seeing what the reaction is as you bring in a little more of this or a little less of that are definitely places to start. But you are not an outlier in that, and it will not be surprising if you find your conventional versus organic mix shifts, and even significantly by a good 20% or more as you figure out your role in the community.
Oh, thanks, Dickie. That's really helpful.
Yeah. Other comments, questions about stage five? I saw someone in the comments said, "Yikes." This is, and I'm glad we're being honest about this. This is not for the faint of heart. What's amazing to me is that we have talked to so many startups, and we did a peer call where people asked if we could invite a bunch of long-term organizers, some whose stores had opened, people have been organizing 10 years or more, some whose stores open, and some whose stores weren't even open yet, and weren't open, still aren't open, another year later, and asked them to just come and say, if they could go back and make a different decision, would they have organized this food co-op? And I know what they're going to say. And every one of them shocked me by saying, no regrets. I would have organized this food co-op. And when I said that in a session earlier in the series, someone from Cedar Falls, Iowa, who has been organizing for a long time, I don't know if it's 10 years, but it's getting close. And they've had sites that were like, it looked like it was going to happen, and then it fell through, crazy stuff. And they got in the comments and said, absolutely. Our community is better because the food co-op organized and because of what we've done. And we're going to open that store. But if we don't, I will never have a regret. So, if that's who you are and that's how you feel and that's how your community feels, then organize a food co-op. But if you think it's an easy way to get a natural food store in your community, do not organize a food co-op because cooperation's tough and the grocery industry has never been tougher. And we want you to know that going in and have the right to make the decision based on knowing that. Yeah, Maggie.
I want to start out by thanking you for developing stage five. I think it's really critical, and it just makes me think one thing that when you talk about finding your audience or your shoppers, the point that you made about maybe your area from which your shoppers will come is not the area that you think it's going to be. I think that is super important. And I mean, I think about Dorchester, which has a ton of members who never shop there because they support the co-op in theory, but it's not convenient for them to go grocery shopping there. So the importance of really bonding with your immediate neighbors is incredibly important. And just making sure that everyone sort of keeps that like front and center in their outreach is huge. It's huge.
It is huge. I'm really glad you said that because I do think this is another place I'm very big at owning mistakes. There's no such thing as doing anything useful and not making mistakes, including experts. And I think we made a mistake here. I think that when I came into the startup food co-op movement, I was told constantly by those training me that owners, owners, owners. We need lots of owners because that's who's going to shop. That's who's going to shop. And as soon as I started studying the numbers, the percentages of startups about 8 years ago of how many when they opened, how much of the sales that first 6 months were coming from owners and how much from non-owners, it did not bear out. And then I helped some startups that were wildly underperforming build their sales, and I helped them grow their sales quite effectively. But the appeal to owners who hadn't shopped yet to come in and shop, almost utterly useless. What
Yeah.
was useful was finding out who already was finding this store valuable and building on that audience. And those people became owners eventually too. But it's unfortunately, I think we had that wrong in the startup, the first half of the third wave, that it's not, owners are incredibly important because if your community is not invested in the idea, you definitely won't find the shoppers either. Like we definitely have seen that. Like it's not like, oh, we don't need owners. No, low ownership numbers will bear out to lack of support, but it those people are not going to guarantee your shopper success. And you're right, Maggie. I didn't know that makes sense that that's been a challenge for Dorchester. A lot of people love the concept, but they don't live in the
And,
neighborhood.
and they don't live in the neighborhood. And what you really need is people who come in when they need milk. It's like around the corner, and they'll come in and they'll buy their incredibly high priced organic milk from your food co-op because they identify it as their grocery store,
Yep.
right? And so that's I mean, so I worked for the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and we made a loan to the Dorchester Food Co-op. And one of the things, they came in and they said, oh, we have 1,000 members, so we're ready to get moving. And we said, because I live in Boston, I said, where are your members from? And it was a hugely broad area. And we said to them, we want you to bring us 1,000 members who live within a close enough distance that you can assume that they will actually shop at your store. And even that didn't really do it. But really, I think you're right. It's not members. I mean, members are great if members are loyal, but it's shoppers. It's shoppers that you want. And if you live in a neighborhood where joining a co-op is sort of not part of your psychological DNA, that's really okay as long as it becomes their store.
Yep. And people's opinions on that can change. I know I'm letting this run over, and those who have to go, I understand, but I think this is valuable, so I'm just gonna I'm using my executive authority here and saying we're gonna let this run long. Because Maggie's bringing up an incredibly important point. And then also we saw, I want to say another big city. So open around the same time was the Wild Onion Market in a neighborhood of Chicago that has a very similar population actually to Dorchester. And they did not get all the sales they expected open, but far closer than Dorchester, far, far that, ooh, this is gonna suck for a while, but it's probably gonna find its way, kind of range. This is gonna be hard, and incredibly, they're like, well, our owners aren't here, our owners aren't here. And there are definitely ways that whole delivering on the values didn't happen. And that is
Mhm.
definitely an issue. They could definitely bring back more of their owners by meeting that on a better way. But instead, people from in a half mile of them showed up like crazy. And it became the neighborhood grocery store.
Yeah.
And it has something to correct, but they were definitely offering what that neighborhood wanted enough that they filled 75% of the sales goal. Very little of that's owners. So some startups, the challenge is both we need our owners to be from the neighborhood and the community. Um, that's great. I actually owner numbers I found still predict how much there really is an appetite for something like the food co-op at all in a community. So I still think they're very important. I think lenders should still look at it, but we have to know what is their plan to serve the neighborhood they're in, or are they an Assabet? Assabet Co-op Market, which is in the suburbs of Boston, actually had a market study that said, any market studies, my food co-op, tiny little trade area. It's basically our town with a circle around it, and outside, no, that's a tiny piece of our sales. Assabet had the opposite, like you're going to be a regional draw. And that is what has happened. And so you have a market study saying you're going to be a regional draw. People will drive here. That's a different situation. And so that's something you want to look at very closely in your market study. I have seen them be right far off more often than wrong about what kind of draw circle you will have. Shirley, your hand's been forever. I'm sorry. What did you want to share?
Well, you made a statement about doing fundraising to support the store for the first year or two. Wouldn't that give people an indication that the store's not doing very well?
So first off, we don't. So what I'm saying is, this usually becomes apparent you're going to have to raise ca more cash. Usually in the first year, you can already tell. You usually don't have to do it till year two. And
Oh.
if we get to the point, thanks, John. If you get to the point that you do have to do it, believe me, you should have already been communicating that the store is in some trouble. And people, "Well, isn't that the death knell?" No, that's not what I found. That's
Hmm.
absolutely. It's about how you do it. It's about how well you connect to your community. We've absolutely seen it actually immediately turn around sales 5 to 10% in some co-ops and some co-ops not. It really depends on your level of connection to your community and how you handle it. So, and I've even heard Michelle Schreier say, she's like, there's a startup they're working with now. They're like, they already raised the money we said they had to raise to open the store. Like they are complete and they're still raising money. She was, I love it. She's like, because honestly, the reality is that we don't know how it's going to perform after we're open. And if we end up in a position where we have more cash than we'd hoped, we can pay down debts, hallelujah, and be more cooperatively owned. But if not, we're prepared. And so I think there's a shifting philosophy you're going to see coming about it's not that the co-op can't be self-sustaining and becomes a nonprofit grocery store that needs an infusion of donated money on a consistent basis. But there is a point to a good number of us will need one cash infusion sometime in the first 3 years as we figure it out. And now we're stabilized, but we burned too much cash figuring it out. And we've got to replenish that. But if you're not in that position yet, no, like I would wait till you know you're in that position. If your store's already open, like, and you will know well before you have to do it if you're watching those numbers and you can prepare for it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
All right. I don't mean to be keeping folks, but if anyone else had any comments, questions they want to share, this is a passion area and we are learning together right now, so I want to hear it. All
Yeah,
right.
thank
All
I
right.
just was going to chime in to
Yeah.
validate these two things that I heard in my own experience when you were talking. One was the idea of expectation of the work after opening. So I remember when I was involved, boots on the ground with a startup co-op, and I was working like 80 to 100-hour weeks leading up to the store opening. And I remember a week or two after it opened, it hadn't stopped, right? And I was, in the store. I wasn't on the board. I was in the store, and it had not stopped. It had just gotten different, as you say, right? It
you.
had just changed. And I was so mad. Like I just remember being the rage inside of me. And for a little bit I couldn't figure it out, right? I was kind of like, "Whoa, I'm so angry. We accomplished this huge thing and it feels so exciting and what is happening?" And I sort of realized, oh, I thought this was going to end. I thought that the push was going to give me some personal reprieve, but in fact, it's the opposite.
And you
So,
made a heavy commitment to the co-op under an understanding. You made a huge investment of your life under an understanding. And then you got stiffed, basically, because if you walk out on the co-op now, you
right,
know,
right. Then what? Yeah.
and the person I want to give
So,
credit, the person who put this to words and pointed it out to us, which is so crystal clear that, and it's the rage she pointed out. It's not that people can't adjust to the concept that it's true. It's the rage when you feel lied to about what's going to happen. And this was Gabby Davis from the board of Detroit People's Food Co-op.
sure.
She's like, if I had known what it was going to, she's the treasurer. So I was the treasurer. And if I had known what was going to happen after that store opened, just who knows, maybe I would have made the decision to be here, but I didn't get that choice.
Hmm.
And I think I'm really glad to hear it resonates with you, who's someone who rarely names their rage from
Sure.
my experience of
Sure.
you. And I think if we're dishonest about what it's going to cost human beings to open food co-ops, of course there's going to be rage. And so what we're really working right now is being extremely honest with people about alternate opportunities, about what it's going to cost you, and let people make those decisions open-eyed.
Mhm.
But I think it'd be great to get you and Gabby and some others together who are willing, whose co-ops are going to be okay, who are willing to talk about that feeling and where it came from and the experience of what it's like to be a post-open board.
That would be fun. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know a lot of people had to go off and cook dinner. Thank you for those geeks who stayed around and had thoughts with me and thought and talked about this. I really appreciate this. And we will, of course, we've got 3 sessions tomorrow on Wednesday and on Thursday before the sessions end. The videos from all of these sessions will be emailed to you by the end of the day Friday, right before I go on vacation. So you will get that email late in the day Friday, and it will connect you to the playlist for all of the sessions in order from FCI Live. And we hope you'll share them with others. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, JQ. It's great.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm really glad you were here to discuss that with me. Appreciate it.